Welcome to this explainer. When we think of the Seleção, we almost immediately picture the flair, the passion, and those iconic yellow and green jerseys, right? But today, we're doing something a little bit different. We are diving straight into the cold, hard numbers that actually power this legendary team on the world stage. We're going to decode the massive financial engine behind Brazil's 2026 World Cup squad.
Here is the playbook for today. We'll start with Section 1, the billion-dollar squad. Then move to Section 2, Brazil's massive wage gap. Section 3 is the million-dollar bonus. Section 4, Neymar and Vinicius Jr. And finally, Section 5, the economics of winning. So to really grasp these astronomical numbers, we're going to follow a macro to microeconomic funnel. Let's just jump right in.
Section 1, the billion-dollar squad. Analyzing the macroeconomics.
Okay, it is absolutely wild to think about this number. 909.2 million euros. That is the total estimated market value of Brazil's 26-man roster, according to the latest Transfermarkt data. I mean, we are literally talking about nearly €1 billion of human capital stepping out onto the pitch at the exact same time. This valuation places Brazil firmly in the upper echelon of international football, representing just this massive, concentrated collection of top-tier assets drawn from the world's absolute most elite clubs.
Now this perfectly illustrates where they sit globally in terms of actual player salaries, because despite that massive €909 million market value, Brazil's total weekly player payroll of $4.16 million actually trails way behind Portugal's incredible $8.08 million weekly spend. So what's driving that? Well, Portugal's numbers are heavily inflated by astronomical Saudi Pro League wages, specifically Cristiano Ronaldo's. So while Brazil might not have the absolute highest weekly wage bill at the tournament, their $4.16 million weekly output still highlights immense elite-level compensation, especially when you compare it to a baseline team like the USA.
Moving on to Section 2, Brazil's massive wage gap from Europe to the domestic league. What's really fascinating here is how that $4.16 million weekly payroll is divided up internally among the 26 players wearing the exact same national shirt. It is far from an even split. When we anchor the data, the wealth disparity is honestly jarring. You have European-based superstars like Neymar earning nearly £1 million a week, and Vinicius Jr. bringing in just shy of £350,000. But contrast that sharply against the domestic-based players. For instance, Flamengo's Pedro earns £30,000, and Palmeiras goalkeeper Weverton takes home £13,000 a week. Just picture that dynamic for a second. They're fighting for the exact same World Cup trophy, sitting side by side in the exact same locker room, yet they are existing in entirely different economic universes.
The crucial point here is understanding exactly why this gap exists in the first place, and it perfectly highlights what's known as the age versus value inverse law in modern sports economics. Basically, this is the phenomenon where a veteran player's weekly wage represents their past achievements and pedigree, while their transfer value represents their future potential and their remaining prime years.
We actually have a perfect example of that law in action right inside the Brazilian squad. Take the 34-year-old veteran Casemiro. He commands a massive wage of $300,000 a week due to his incredible pedigree and experience, but his transfer value has dropped all the way down at just $8 million. Now contrast that with 28-year-old Bruno Guimarães. He earns less than half of Casemiro's wage at $120,000, but because he's in the absolute prime of his career, he boasts a massive $75 million market value. It's just a brilliant look at how clubs and markets value current output versus future potential.
Let's look at Section 3. The million-dollar bonus. Motivation for the sixth star.
This raises a really interesting question. Does a billion-dollar valuation actually buy motivation on the pitch? When players are already making hundreds of thousands a week, how exactly does a national federation incentivize them? Well, the Brazilian Football Confederation certainly thinks money talks, offering a proposed $1 million cash bonus per player if the Seleção clinches the 2026 World Cup title. It's an extraordinary sum for international football, and it's designed specifically to unite a squad that spans those massive economic divides we just talked about. It gives the domestic players a genuinely life-changing payday and offers the European stars a highly prestigious cherry on top.
What is truly fascinating is how this whole bonus came about. It's kind of wild to picture a group of guys making millions stepping into a boardroom to act as union reps for their teammates, but that's exactly what happened here. This wasn't some top-down mandate from the suits. The bonus structure was actively negotiated by a core group of senior and peak prime players. Leaders like Vinicius Jr., Alisson, Marquinhos, and Casemiro. They really stepped up to ensure the terms were fair across the entire 26-man squad.
As noted in the reporting by El Batola,
The ultimate goal of injecting this extra $1 million incentive is pretty clear. It's to push a team that has suffered a remarkably long absence from the global winners' podium back to the absolute top. They desperately want that coveted sixth star on their jersey, and the Federation is apparently more than willing to put up $26 million to make sure the squad's motivation is peaking at exactly the right moment.
Section 4. Neymar and Vinicius Jr., the microeconomics of superstars. Let's funnel down even further into the two biggest commercial juggernauts on this team. Because to really understand Brazil's finances, you have to understand the two gravity wells pulling the most capital. The economic contrast between Vinicius Jr. and Neymar is fascinating, and it pays off that age versus value law perfectly. Vinicius is 25 years old and represents the absolute peak of current market value at 150 million euros. He is the future. Neymar, on the other hand, at 34, represents the peak of legacy earning power. While his transfer market value has dipped to 8 million euros, his weekly wage of over £940,000 remains utterly unmatched in the squad.
To truly contextualize Vinicius Jr.'s $150 million valuation, we need to look at the global landscape. He is literally tied as the second most valuable player on the entire planet right now, sitting right alongside England's Jude Bellingham and just a hair behind France's Kylian Mbappe at $180 million. So Vinicius isn't just a Brazilian asset, he is one of the most highly valued properties in world sports today.
Yet despite his dropping transfer market value, Neymar's astronomical weekly wage is entirely justified by his legacy. We're talking 75 goals and 54 assists for Brazil. He sits on the absolute precipice of history, just 2 goals shy of surpassing Pelé as Brazil's all-time top scorer. So you aren't just paying for his legs at 34. You are paying for the aura, the global brand, and the incredible historical weight he brings to the pitch.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the economics of winning. Does wealth equal success?
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to pull back and look at what all this money, the massive wages, the transfer values, the million-dollar bonuses, is actually trying to achieve on the field. Because despite navigating Group C against the likes of Morocco, Haiti, and Scotland, the Brazilian FA knows a very harsh truth. Financial dominance on paper doesn't always translate to the grass. You can have the highest market value, the richest players, and the biggest bonuses, but the ball is still round, and 90 minutes of football cares very, very little about your bank account.
So, the big question you should take away from this is, in the modern era of sports economics, does fielding a billion-dollar squad actually guarantee competitive success, or does it just raise the price of failure? Definitely something to think about as you watch the 2026 tournament unfold. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.